So just a disclaimer, this is actually only one part of a series I'm making that's going to be compiled into a larger video. So be sure to start from part one, but also to look out for the entire compilation. Thank you for watching. Nen chart placement. Now that we've gone over all the Nen types, I think it would be interesting to take a step back and look at the Nen chart as a whole. I took a bit to look for any patterns or logic as to why the Nen types were placed where they were, and I might have found something, although all this is speculation. It seems like manipulation and conjuration in the southern quadrant of the chart might represent a certain level of physicality or focus on the physical world, while transmutation and mission are all about controlling your aura directly. This is not to say that these categories can't be used to affect aura and physical things specifically, but let's break this down a bit. As we have gone over, manipulation is about infusing your aura into something in order to exert control over it. Usually this is going to be a physical object or substance, and even when manipulation is being used to open someone's nodes or alter memories, you are still manipulating that person's physical body and or mind, i.e. the brain. Conjuration is obviously about manifesting physical objects with your aura or physically turning existing objects into something else. On the other hand, emission is about detaching your aura from your body, and transmutation is about changing the properties of your aura, which we know can include things like aura shape. Continuing down this route, we can also see a sort of duality with some of the Nen types placed opposite of each other. Manipulation is usually going to be used as a way to control physical substances and objects, while transmutation is usually what allows you to control and shape your aura directly. Conjured objects have a certain level of staying power and or permanence, as mentioned earlier, so some specific conjured objects you could separate from your body, but only as specific physical objects, while emission seems to be detaching raw aura and by extension allowing you to remotely influence it. This also creates what I think could be interesting physical and aura pairs. Emission and manipulation on one side with conjuration and transmutation on the other. I think both pairs do also share similarities too. Manipulation requires being able to infuse your aura into an object, so it makes sense it would be next to emission, which is just separating your aura from your body. Conjuration is about creating physical things, so it makes sense that it would be next to transmutation, the Nen category about giving your aura the properties of things that a conjurer might be able to summon or create in its entirety. The Nen types are then bisected down the middle of the chart by enhancement and specialization. But why that is leaves me less certain, because I don't really see how enhancement parallels or contrasts specialization, if at all, because specialization can literally be anything. It's possible that they represent some sort of weird balance reinforced by how they split down the middle of the chart, or Togashi ran out of interesting places to put them, and just wanted to make sure all the categories were balanced, or I'm just reading too much into this. It's also that there's a pattern of physical and aura, with specialization being an outlier at the beginning and end of the loop. With manipulation emphasizing physical control, emission detaching aura from your body, enhancement boosting the efficiency and or strength of physical things, transmutation emphasizing changing your aura, and conjuration focusing on creating physical objects. The Hunter x Hunter Phantom Wiki also proposes that the Nen types at the bottom half of the chart, so manipulation, conjuration, and specialization, tend to rely more on restrictions, conditions, limitations, etc., than the three Nen types at the top of the chart, emission, enhancement, and transmutation. This isn't confirmed or stated to be 100% true, but it does seem to generally be the case, and we know that some believe enhancers don't even need abilities to function well. But stealing an ability as a specialist requires 4 to 5 conditions to be met, and specialization abilities usually seem more specific. Manipulation and conjuration usually control or create specific things, and specialists seem to have strict rules they need to follow despite their general uniqueness. Emitters can just fire raw blasts of aura, and transmuters do allow for more flexibility than conjurers, in a sense, because you can pick and choose more due to not being forced to recreate an object in its entirety. Rihan also says that emitters and enhancers are more likely to have a spray and pray tactic, in which they activate techniques repeatedly or have more chances to counter his predator in chapter 388. It's possible that a major factor for why Togashi put the Nen types where they are is simply for more game balance reasons. For example, the only affinity opposite of enhancement is specialization. We learn from chapters like Izunabi that enhancement is extremely helpful and important to combat, and all the other Nen types don't have an affinity for enhancement that is below 60%. The one opposite to enhancement is specialization, which seems to be able to break certain rules of Nen or have abilities that let someone utilize other Nen types or affinities anyway. This means no Nen type is inherently just impossibly dogshit at reinforcing and protecting their body, since they can at least reach above a 50% in enhancement. I also have to imagine some are further from enhancement, because types like manipulation and conjuration have more potential to be OP with a high ranking enhancement than other categories, or it's a sort of trade-off for being able to summon objects or control something to do the fighting for you. While you could say this means emission is OP because it allows for more range while being next to enhancement, it does seem like enhancement is restricted to physical targets. So I'd be surprised if someone enhanced a blast of aura, even if enhancing a thrown projectile like a rock, enhancing the user of a blast, or boosting something from a distance certainly is possible. Being able to both conjure things efficiently and enhance those same conjurations better than other Nen types seems less balanced than keeping them distant. It may also play into the physical aura pattern on the chart, with conjuration creating physical objects, transmutation altering one's own aura, enhancement boosting the natural properties of physical objects or one's own body, emission separating aura from one's body, and manipulation controlling physical objects. This way, no one Nen type, except specialization sometimes, has a monopoly on abilities that focus on aura and abilities that focus on the physical world. I think the way the nen chart is set up also prevents enhancement from being an overpowered nen type. The thing about enhancement is that even at its most basic, boosting the durability of an object, there would almost be no reason to ever not use it without proper balancing. However, enhancement is sandwiched between two categories that do not give it physical things to enhance. You cannot enhance raw emitted aura because it is not a physical thing, even if said aura can carry the effects of enhancement to a more distant target, and transmutation is still aura and not an object. So if you transmuted a limb, you could not enhance the limb directly, even if the limb has the ability to enhance other physical things. The reason Hisoka doesn't use enhancement on his bungee gum to make it even stronger, or Gon doesn't use enhancement on his Jajankan scissors and Jajankan paper is either because the amount of aura to do this is not worth the trade-off, or more likely, they cannot because you cannot use enhancement to enhance your own raw aura. And being unable to enhance your own raw aura also makes sense because there has to be some sort of limitation on that, or else you just cycle indefinitely where you just keep enhancing it and enhancing it like a weird loop. So there's probably almost definitely some sort of limitation on that. Now, if you conjure a limb, certainly you can use enhancement to increase said limb's strength or other attributes. But the thing about that is enhancement is actually kind of far from conjuration and manipulation on the nen chart, which means it will take a considerable amount of time to learn if you're a conjurer or vice versa if you're an enhancer. And why worrying about conjuring a whole new object to enhance when you could probably just use an existing object, especially if conjuration is probably not your specialty in the case of enhancers. Of course, if you're a transmuter, you sit smack dab between conjuration and enhancement, but then you probably want to try to focus a bit more on transmutation before you start messing around too much with conjuration and enhancement. In Chapter 60, when Wing is describing the nen chart, he helps conceptualize it by breaking the nen types into two ideas. The aptitude one gets at birth, and the ones we acquire during our lifetime. He uses Gon as an example, by saying Gon has a supple and agile muscular structure that he was born with, but he developed the accuracy of his five senses by playing. So we can assume that either intentionally or unintentionally, nen represents a marriage of these two ideas, which is sort of alluded to in how each nen category has vague, not always accurate archetypes for those that fall under its affinities. There are some limitations we are born with or have a proclivity towards, but that does not mean everything is completely static or unchanging. Some things can be honed, neglected, or changed. This is sort of reflected in the nen categories themselves. While it's certainly possible to dive into the categories first from your own to great effect, Wing says in Chapter 60 that acquiring an ability that falls under a nen category you don't have a good affinity for requires excessive efforts and strong character. However, Bisky says in Chapter 144 that you shouldn't only stick to learning your own nen type, and learning other nen types can make you more flexible and well-rounded. The ideal spread is a kind of bell curve, with your own nen type being the highest point you spend the most time practicing, and each of the other nen categories having less and less time devoted to them the farther away they are from your nen type. So an enhancer would want to practice enhancement the most, followed by transmutation and emission as the second most practiced categories, with manipulation and conjuration being the nen categories they spend the least amount of time practicing. There's also something to be said about nen in connection to the life force and willpower. There's of course the fact that nen can become stronger the more willpower you have, but nen is also powered by life force. Something I think is fascinating is that despite being a kind of life force, or seems to have a strong connection to death. Certain abilities can actually become stronger after death or in response to the act of it despite being powered by life force. You could see this as a manifestation of someone pouring all their life force into something, or the lasting effect someone's life could have on the world. A sort of tangible representation of their legacy or passion. In many stories, life force is depicted as an inherently good, healing, or benevolent force, but this does not seem to be the case with aura and nen. While aura definitely can be harnessed for more benevolent purposes, it is clearly a more neutral force, with even a basic malice-infused Ren being capable of physically and or mentally harming someone that isn't well protected. Possible this could showcase how not every instance of willpower or intent is good, and how not everyone dedicates their life to doing good or nice things. If you get attacked by someone with a strong enough malicious intent, you could die or have your own willpower and strength save you. Finally, you have conditions, limitations, and risk. The greater limitations / condition, the more aura one can draw out. To me, this has always been sort of intuitive as a way of showing how making certain sacrifices or allocating your life to certain things can show your passion or yield results later. This is purely how I visualize this, and it isn't supported in canon text, but sometimes I think of aura as a faucet or nozzle with limitations / conditions, giving the faucet more focus or a tighter nozzle, and thus increasing the water pressure and strength at the cost of decreasing the range of spread and influence. So limitations could also represent something akin to this focus and risk with how much you're willing to give up to achieve a goal. You could ultimately see a nen battle as not just a battle of strength, but a battle of wills and ideology. Someone who is willing to die for a cause is more likely to win a fight than someone who isn't. Of course, a lot of nen is literally just magic that happens in the story, so I'm in no way trying to imply that nen and aura are purely metaphorical and not real in the world of Hunter x Hunter. But in the same way Hatsu and nen abilities are often symbolic of the characters that wield them, then aura and its types in general might be too. So I didn't know where else to put this, but in chapter 137, Bisky says there's actually a lot of children who can use nen. It's just rare to find strong ones or ones who are capable of fighting exceptionally well. So nen is a more common phenomenon than it might first seem, and it could convey the idea that only a few people have a ton of willpower, conviction, and talent, while also showing that there are aspects of the world and society not everyone can see. Morena also connected her own research about the likelihood of people falling to different nen types. Morena herself emphasizes that this may not be 100% accurate, as it's only based on her personal experience and isn't an official peer-reviewed study or anything. In chapter 408, Morona says that it seems people statistically have a 27% chance of being an enhancer, 24% chance of being an emitter, 19% chance of being a transmuter, 15% chance of being a manipulator, and a 15% chance of being a conjurer, and a 0.033% chance of being a specialist. I would take this statistic with a grain of salt, but it's interesting that enhancement seems to be the most common, followed by emission. I wonder if it is because these Nen categories can be more straightforward in either personalities or function, or if it's because the further you get from specialization in the chart, the more common the category, with specialization itself being the rarest category. Other Nen ability classifications. Since I went over some of the different subclassifications when talking about manipulation, I might as well go over some of the other groupings of Nen. These kinds of categories are grouped by similarities in function or traits the Nen abilities within them share, but I'd argue that they are not as important as the 6 Nen types, since you aren't born with an affinity for them in the same way, even if some Nen classifications require the use of specific Nen types. For this section, I'll just go through this list of subcategories in the order they appear on the wiki, so alphabetical, and look for where the classification is mentioned and what it entails. Some classifications of Nen are definitely more important than others. For example, curses end up being referenced a lot in Hunter x Hunter and can be very dangerous. Barrier types are mentioned in chapter 398, along with landmine types. They are described as Nen abilities in which multiple traps can be set over a wide area using or infused tools, such as charms, ropes, tags, etc. that act as triggers. So basically, they're sort of like booby traps that are set off once a specific trigger is activated, kind of like a metaphorical or literal tripwire. We don't know much about the collaborative type abilities, but they are alluded to in chapter 375, when the chapter touches on 5th Prince Tubepa's guardian Nen beast. The Nen beast itself is a transmuter that requires a research colleague, so we can assume that abilities within this classification require 2 or more parties to work together in order to achieve an effect. In chapter 376, Zhang guardian Nen beast is revealed to be a conjurer with a composite/compound type ability. Said ability is one that activates multiple abilities upon satisfying multiple conditions. Specifically, when the owner of a coin satisfies said conditions, multiple abilities will be invoked. So we can assume that Nen abilities classified as composite or compound types are like clusters of multiple abilities that activate in tandem, or a single ability that grants multiple other abilities, like a 2-for-1 deal. Counteractive type abilities are ones that activate in response to the user taking damage to perform a counterattack or strike back. The act of striking second acts as a risk to boost the power of the ability, and the more risk the user runs, the more powerful the ability. Additionally, the greater the damage suffered, the stronger the ability's counter will be. In chapter 373, when second Kakin Prince Camilla was shot and killed, her ability activated and killed the attacker before using the attacker's own life force to heal and revive Camilla. The weakness of these kinds of abilities seems to be that there may be ways to incapacitate their users without actually injuring or killing them in order to avoid triggering their ability. In chapter 375, Shikaku seems afraid of Prince Hulkenberg's Nen beast having a counteractive ability that can rewrite memories upon activation. So it's clear that counteractive abilities can do more than just outright kill or hurt an assailant in response when attacked, by scaling or responding in other ways. Curses are basically exactly what they sound like, using Nen to apply a curse as a persistent negative effect. In chapter 120, the classification is explained in more detail. They tend to be quite dangerous because of their long-lasting effects, and due to the fact that they are often created from a place of negative emotion. So the death of the person who inflicted the curse can actually make it stronger instead of weakening it, due to the mechanics of post-mortem Nen. It is possible to remove a curse, but this is noted as being extremely hard to do. Those who can actually lift or remove curses are known as exorcists, but exorcism is an extremely rare skill/ability. In chapter 325, Moral says that the Hunters Association has 1 exorcist amongst their ranks. In chapter 120, Fink says that there are fewer than 10 exorcists in the world that can lift curses set by those who have died. A diffusive levy type ability, which I've also seen translated as collecting dispersal type or scattering/collecting type, is the kind of ability Prince Tyson's Nen beast makes use of, and diffusive levy abilities are implied to be those that gather something from multiple targets using various agents in chapter 375. For example, Tyson's Nen beast is an emitter that spits out little tadpole-esque things that absorb aura from followers of Tyson's teachings, and in return gives them feelings of happiness. Double/doppelganger abilities are explained in chapter 53 as abilities that create a copy of the user. This involves conjuring a double and then controlling it with manipulation. In chapter 368, Hanzo explains that there are automatic clones and clones that are controlled directly. Doubles that are directly controlled allow for greater precision at the cost of greater restrictions. In Hanzo's case, his actual body is in a defenseless, unconscious state, and waking it up causes his clone to disappear. While automatic doubles require a lot less focus, if any, they cannot carry out more complex orders as a trade-off, leaving the user with less control over them. Exorcism is something that we touched on twice already, but for the sake of organization and metaphorical balance within this article, I will also cover it here. Those with the ability to lift curses are known as exorcists, and this is an extremely rare skill. Moral says that the Hunters Association has 1 exorcist among its members, and in chapter 325 and in chapter 120, Fink says that there are fewer than 10 exorcists in the world that can lift curses set by those who have died. The act of exorcism virtually always imposes a negative condition or drawback on the one removing the curse. In chapter 147, Almagon has to carry around a Nen beast that has eaten the target curse, a bomb set by Genthru, with the creature's size seemingly correlating to the strength of the curse, and the Nen beast remaining until he can meet the conditions to undo the curse. Additionally, curse that's too powerful has a chance of killing the user, and apparently this creature cannot remove curses laid by the dead. In chapter 261, Hina has to deal with her stomach growing bigger in correlation to the strength of curses she ingests. And in chapter 325, the exorcist brought to heal Gon by the Hunters Association freaks out and says she could not hope to remove it with her ability. So exorcism seems to have very big limitations and drawbacks for most people. With the info we have on exorcists, we can assume that exorcism abilities could potentially refer to abilities that exorcise curses. Even Nanika's wishes do have very strict rules they follow, even if the burden of the wishes does not fall on Killua or Nanika herself, but anyone else who makes a subsequent wish instead. In chapter 389, we learn of the have-nots Nen ability, Yomotsu Higui, we who are born out of convenience, which is apparently a haunting type ability. The classification is for abilities that activate after the death of a user to possess a specific target and bring them harm in a variety of ways, implying a massive overlap with curse type abilities, even if curse abilities don't always require the death of the person invoking them. It is currently unrevealed if there are haunting types that wouldn't qualify as curses, or if all haunting types are a type of curse. Yomotsu Higui specifically is described as an assassination curse that requires the user to carry something related to the target, such as their name, photograph, or part of their body, and staying as close to the target for as long as possible. The greater your desire for killing the target, the stronger the curse grows. Once these activation conditions have been met, the ability would be activated upon the user's death. Where someone dies seems to matter a great deal because in chapter 389, the narrator says ideally the one invoking the curse should kill themselves in front of the target's eyes, and Fukutake explains how the farther away the user is from the intended target, the longer it will take for the curse to run its course. And in the presence of such strong guardian spirit beasts, possessed by each of the Kakine princes, the user needs to have the resolve to get close to a prince before touching them and killing themselves within said prince's field of view. Yomotsu Higui steals the aura of the cursed until it kills them. At its most powerful, it can lock the target into a state of Zetsu and kill them in a few hours. However, when talking about its range, Fukutake says that if it was cast safely from the room she is in, it would take 3 months for the curse to kill the target prince, if 3 people all cast it on the same target. On the other hand, if the character Mozuba used it from the room 1002, it would take 10 days. But Mashush and Taylor performing the exact same action with the same Nen ability from the same position would take 2 weeks to kill the target. Landmine type abilities are mentioned in chapter 398, along with barrier types. Landmine types involve a trigger that is made by applying Nen directly to a specific place. This limitation means that it is limited to 2 to 3 spots, but tends to have more powerful influence behind it. In chapter 388, Kurapika refers to a stealth dolphin as a lone/sliding type ability. And that term seems to refer to abilities that can transfer a Nen ability to someone else so they can use it in place of the original Nen user. Kurapika's stealth dolphin, awakening Ototo Nen in chapter 369, lets us know that these kinds of abilities can act as a form of initiation and awaken those unable to use Nen already to aura. This is also reinforced by Kurapika using stealth dolphin to awaken all the students in his class to Nen. The term Nen Beast is another important class of Nen abilities that gets thrown around a lot within Hunter x Hunter. I would say it's up there with curses as far as importance and consideration. The term Nen Beast seems to refer to creatures, automata, or other such animated or living entities created from Nen, and generally they tend to resemble people, animals, or some mix of both. Although this isn't a hard rule or anything, since there are Nen Beasts that look more like objects, such as Kurapika's stealth dolphin and Kite's crazy sloth's clown, or abstracts, such as the Kakine guardian spirit beast. They are usually created via conjuration, but there are other ways to create Nen Beasts, or at least things that resemble them, that don't utilize the Nen type. For example, in chapter 244 and chapter 202, Merle can use his deep purple ability to create constructs that resemble and move like animals, such as humans and rabbits, using what is a mix of manipulation on the smoke he makes, and probably emission if we consider the detached aura cores he has to make with the orders for such constructs. This he seems to use transmutation to create Cookie, but I can't find exactly which is confirmed if that's the case. However, we do know it is possible to make constructs resembling or acting like living creatures with transmutation, since Zeno uses that and then Kagura to give his aura the properties and shape of dragons, while Sadasu transmutes his aura into an arm, something that would otherwise be a living body part. Future Doug here. So in chapter 171, Bisky actually does confirm that the lotion/ointment Cookie is making is actually made from transmuted aura, although I still can't verify if Cookie herself, like her physical body, is transmuted aura, or if it's a conjured physical body and then Cookie can then transmute aura into lotion. According to Rihan in chapter 374, Nen Beasts are usually made to serve one of 3 broad functions. 1. To increase the user's number of allies and control said Nen Beasts. 2. To put more pressure and strain on the enemies while cutting down the number of said enemies. And 3. To take something from those affected by the Nen Beast as a way of increasing the strength of the Nen Beast or its user. In chapter 360, Bill correctly speculates that the Kakine Prince's guardian spirit beasts are some sort of parasitic type ability. Kurapika asks if this kind of ability is somewhat like a curse before Bill confirms, and elaborates by saying parasitic abilities utilize the aura of the host to use its ability, and it can materialize in many different forms. Parasitic types act without the host being aware, and their host can't actually control them. Despite this, not every parasitic type seems like it produces negative effects or curses. Some parasitic abilities actually protect their host and can even attack a target in defense of the host. So parasitic abilities cannot be controlled by the host directly and feed on their aura. According to Bill in chapter 362, parasitic type abilities can be unpredictable because of the fact that feeding on their host's aura can cause them to become greatly influenced by their host's personality and thoughts, and/or feelings. This means parasitic nimbeasts are a mixture of both the thoughts and goals of the person that created them and the thoughts and goals of their host, which can create what Bill describes as a very tangled and complex life form. This can be seen in how the guardian spirit beasts of the Cat King princes are often very inhuman or abstract looking, while containing traits from multiple creatures and/or concepts. The ideal target for parasitic abilities seems like it would usually be non-users, because a parasitic ability can feed on the residual aura that leaks away from the body of the user, and said user may not notice their aura is being fed on, since they would just feel tired and not notice the amount of aura dropping if the parasite consumes a considerable amount of aura, as explained in chapter 360. In chapter 388, Kurapika refers to Bill's Erageron Hatsu as a supportive type, when pointing out that it's rare for male enhancers to have abilities that fall under this classification. We haven't gotten a lot of details about this classification, but we know that Bill's ability uses enhancement to accelerate the growth of living things. However, as explained in chapter 388, while it can be used on people to increase their Nen abilities, this aspect of the ability is weak on those who are untrained or lacking in proficiency with Nen, such as non-users. With this information, we can assume that supportive type just broadly refers to abilities not aimed at just increasing one's combat strength or engaging in direct combat. It probably also encompasses things like healing others. It could also refer to abilities that lend support to others as opposed to just affecting the user themselves, with things like a boost in power, vitality, healing, etc. Symbiotic/joint type abilities are collaborative abilities that require more than one Nen user to supply aura in order to use the ability or be effective. In chapter 347, Golem has two abilities that fall into this category. The first one is explicitly stated as being a left arm he can conjure on his mech suit. Said arm has a heavy weapon and a seat that an emitter can sit in to provide the weapon with aura to use as ammunition. Golem can also conjure guns that emitters can use to fire destructive Den projectiles, which seems like it's probably also a symbiotic type.